The gates of hell. The sun over Harare was fierce that morning, painting the cracked tar roads in a haze of golden heat. But at the far eastern edge of the city, where the high-density suburbs gave way to an expanse of dry bushland, another kind of heat waited, one that did not come from the sky. It radiated from behind towering concrete walls and coils of rusting razor wire. Chikurubi Maximum Security Prison. Built in the 1970s during the turbulent years of Rhodesian rule, Chikurubi was designed to be impenetrable, a fortress that could crush both body and spirit. It stood as a grim monument to power, squatting on the land like an open wound. Generations of Zimbabweans had grown up hearing whispers about it. Tales of torture, starvation, executions in the dead of night. To the people, it was not a prison. It was the gates of hell. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The prison compound stretched like a labyrinth. Long cell blocks built from crumbling concrete, open courtyards where weeds grew between broken stones, and watchtowers looming at each corner, manned by guards with rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, rotting maize meal, and damp earth. Even the crows circling above seemed reluctant to land within the walls. It was here that Tendai Moyo, only 21 years old, found himself on a dry August morning. His hands were cuffed behind his back, his feet shackled. The police truck had rattled for miles before grinding to a stop in front of the prison gates. Tendai had been arrested during a student protest at the University of Zimbabwe. He had been studying political science, dreaming of a career as a lawyer. Instead, he was dragged into Chikurubi under the accusation of inciting public violence. No trial, no hearing, just chains. The prison gates groaned open, and he was shoved inside. The first thing that hit him was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the oppressive weight of it. The kind of silence that swallowed even the cries of men. Only the clinking of keys and the bark of a guard broke it. "Move! Mwana Wechidiki!" the guard spat, shoving him forward. Young boy. That was how they saw him. Too young, too soft for the darkness that awaited. They marched him down a corridor lined with peeling, paint, and iron doors. Each door had a small slit at eye level. From behind them came muffled whispers, some in Shona, some in Ndebele, others in voices so weak they were barely human. The further they walked, the colder the air became, as though the very walls had absorbed decades of pain. At last, they stopped before a heavy door. A guard pulled it open, and Tendai was pushed inside. The cell was barely 3 meters long and 2 meters wide. With no window, just a hole in the ceiling that dripped rainwater in the wet season and dust in the dry. The stench was unbearable, human waste, sweat, and hopelessness. 5 other men were already crammed inside, their eyes lifted as Tendai stumbled in. They did not speak. They simply watched, assessing him in silence. One of them, an older man with a scar running down his cheek, finally broke the quiet. First time? His voice was low, gravelly, almost kind. Tendai nodded, trying to steady his breathing. The man gave a humorless chuckle. "Then listen carefully, Mwana. This place will eat you alive if you let it." That night, Tendai lay awake, on the cold concrete floor, his stomach empty, his wrists raw from the shackles. Outside, he could hear the distant sound of guards laughing, their voices echoing against the walls. Somewhere further away, a man screamed, and then the scream was cut short. The silence returned, heavier than before. For Tendai, the gates of hell had opened, and there was no turning back. But Tendai would soon learn that the walls of Chikurubi did more than hold prisoners. They held secrets, whispered in the dark, secrets that could either break him or set him free. Morning came, not with sunlight, but with the clang of iron bars. Guards stormed down the corridor, banging batons against doors. "Musi Mu! Wake Up! Dogs! One barked, his boots stomping like thunder. The prisoners rose slowly, stiff from the concrete floor, their backs bent from the cramped night. Tendai's stomach groaned, but hunger had no voice here. He followed the others as the door screeched open. The men were herded into a courtyard, its cracked concrete walls streaked with years of grime. Above, watchtowers loomed, rifles gleaming in the hands of indifferent guards. The air was thick with dust and despair. A line formed near a dented metal pot steaming faintly. Breakfast. Tendai shuffled forward, his heart racing. When it was his turn, a guard slopped a ladle of watery porridge into a rusted tin plate. A cockroach floated on the surface. He gagged, but the scar-faced man from his cell, who had introduced himself simply as Jabulani, hissed at him. "Eat it, or someone else will." Tendai swallowed hard and obeyed. The porridge was sour, gritty with sand. But the hunger inside him didn't care. He devoured every bite, ignoring the insect crunching between his teeth. As the day unfolded, Tendai began to see the rhythm of Chikurubi. It wasn't written anywhere, but every prisoner knew the rules. Respect the generals. The gang leaders controlled food, protection, and survival. To cross them was to invite death. Do not complain. Weakness was currency, and here, it made you broke. Share or bleed. Refuse to share food or space, and knives appeared from nowhere. Never look a guard in the eye. That was an invitation to pain. Jabulani explained these rules in a low voice as they sat against the courtyard wall. His scar twisted when he spoke. "Listen, Moana," he said. "The guards will kill you if the gangs don't. You must choose who you belong to." "Belong to?" Tendai asked. Jabulani's eyes hardened. "Everyone belongs to someone here. Freedom does not exist." That evening, Tendai witnessed the true power inside Chikurubi. In the center of the yard stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with tattoos running down both arms. His name was whispered with awe and fear. General Mahofu. He ruled D-Block with an iron fist, controlling not just the inmates, but also certain guards who smuggled him cigarettes, drugs, and even information. Mahofu's gaze landed on Tendai, the newcomer. He approached slowly, his boots echoing against the cracked concrete. Prisoners stepped aside as though parting the sea. "So," Mahofu said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder, "this is the student?" Tendai nodded cautiously. Mahofu smirked. "Books will not save you here, only loyalty. Remember that." The men around him chuckled darkly. Tendai lowered his eyes, his heart pounding. He knew he had been marked. That night, as darkness swallowed the cells, the screams began. First one, then another. Tendai pressed his back against the cold wall, his breath shallow. The screams weren't random, they were punishments. Jabulani whispered across the darkness. They drag men out for questioning. Sometimes it's a beating. Sometimes. He trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. The smell of blood drifted faintly through the corridor. Tendai closed his eyes, wishing himself anywhere but here. But there was no escape, only the knowledge that tomorrow would be worse. Days bled into weeks. The endless hunger, the cruelty of guards, the suffocating heat, all of it gnawed at Tendai's spirit. Yet in the bleakness, he found one unexpected source of light. Baba Moses. Baba Moses was an old man with silver hair and weary eyes, locked away for speaking against the government. He had been in Chikurubi for more than 10 years, surviving where many had not. He spoke softly, but his words carried weight. "My son," he told Tendai one night, "this place wants to turn you into an animal. Do not let it. Hold on to your mind, even if your body suffers." For the first time since arriving, Tendai felt a flicker of hope. If Baba Moses could endure, perhaps he could too. But Tendai would soon discover that survival in Chikurubi wasn't just about enduring, it was about choosing sides. And the wrong choice could cost him his life before the week was out. The morning began like every other. The clang of iron bars, the shuffle of weary feet, the hollow rattle of tin plates waiting for scraps. But for Tendai, this day carried a shadow. Jabulani's words from the night before haunted him. You must choose who you belong to. As the prisoners filed into the courtyard, Tendai noticed the way eyes followed him. He was no longer invisible. The gangs had seen him. The student with soft hands, the boy who still carried a flicker of defiance in his eyes. To them, he was prey, or worse, a prize. By midday, the inevitable came. 3 men cornered him near the latrine pit, their faces hard, their arms inked with crude tattoos. At their center was Spider, a wiry man with jagged teeth and eyes that glimmered with cruelty. Young blood, Spider hissed, stepping close enough that Tenny could smell his sour breath. General Mhofu wants you, says you've got potential. I don't want trouble, Tenny muttered, his voice barely steady. Spider laughed, the sound like glass breaking. Trouble is already here. You think you can survive here alone? Number U will swear the oath. Tonight. Before Tendai could answer, Spider shoved him hard against the wall. Refuse, and you won't see another sunrise. The message was clear. His choices were illusion. That night, as the cells fell into uneasy silence, Tendai was dragged from his corner by Jabulani and 2 others. His heart hammered in his chest as they led him into an abandoned storeroom deep within the prison. The room smelled of mold and rust. A circle of men waited inside, their faces half hidden in the gloom. At the center stood General Mhofu, his broad frame casting a long shadow. In his hand was a shard of broken glass, its edge glinting in the dim light. Young blood, Mhofu said, his voice calm, commanding. Here, loyalty is sealed not with words, but with blood. You bleed with us, you belong to us. Do you understand? Tendai hesitated, his breath shallow. Mhofu's eyes narrowed. If you refuse, you are nothing, and nothing does not live long in Chikurubi. The room tightened around him. The men began to chant low, guttural words, half prayer, half threat. Tendi's knees trembled. At last, he held out his hand. Mhofu slashed his palm with the glass. Pain seared through him, hot and sharp. His blood dripped onto the dirt floor. The circle erupted in cheers. One by one, the other men pressed their own cut palms against his. The air grew thick with sweat, iron, and violence. Tendai was no longer an outsider. He was bound to them now, whether he liked it or not. The next morning, Tendai felt the change immediately. Where once he was ignored or mocked, prisoners now nodded at him, acknowledging him as part of Mhofu's crew. Even the guards seemed to regard him differently, warily, as though he had gained invisible armor. But belonging came with a price. Today, you prove yourself, Jabulani told him. His scarred face betrayed no emotion. Spider will guide you. Tendai's chest tightened. Prove himself. How? He found out soon enough. That afternoon, he was handed a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a knife, crudely fashioned from sharpened metal. His stomach turned cold. There, Spider whispered, pointing across the yard. That one belongs to another crew. He owes General Mhofu respect he hasn't paid. Teach him a lesson. The target was a frail-looking man, older, sitting alone in the corner of the yard. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, his head bowed as if in prayer. Tendai froze. You want me to... Spider's smile was thin and cruel. Do it, or you bleed instead. Time slowed. Tendai felt the weight of the knife in his hand, its edge catching the sunlight. Around him, the yard buzzed with life. Men playing cards with scraps of paper, guards leaning lazily on rifles, flies circling the open drains. But in that moment, everything narrowed to one impossible choice. Kill, and he would lose the last piece of himself he still clung to. refuse, and he would die by morning. He thought of Baba Moses's words, "This place wants to turn you into an animal. Do not let it." His breath shook, his heart thundered. The knife trembled in his grip. Then, suddenly, shouts erupted near the gate. Guards rushed forward, batons swinging. Another fight had broken out across the yard. The prisoners surged, chaos exploding like a storm. Spider snarled, shoving Tendai back. "Next time," he growled, "and in next time, you won't have a choice." The knife slipped from Tendai's hand, clattering against the stones. He had been spared, but only by fate's cruel mercy. Tendai had avoided bloodshed, for now. But in Chikurubi, fate was dangerous ally. And soon, a darker trial would test not just his courage, but the very limits of his humanity. The signs were there long before the first stone was thrown. For weeks, tension in Chikurubi had been rising like steam trapped beneath iron. The prisoners whispered in the shadows about hunger, about the endless beatings, about the guards who stole what little food was left. Their stomachs had grown hollow, their bodies frail. Anger simmered beneath every cough, every shuffle of bare feet across the cracked courtyard. Tendai felt it too. Every morning, when he lined up for the foul-smelling porridge, his ribs ached from emptiness. He had begun to see men collapse during roll call, their bodies crumpling like paper. Some were carried away and never returned. Even General Mhofu, usually composed and terrifying, had begun to mutter. "They starve us like dogs," he growled one night. "One day, the dogs will bite back." That morning, the kitchen pot was emptier than usual. The porridge was thinner than water, with only a few lumps floating like mocking ghosts. When the ladle scraped the bottom of the pot too soon, a wave of rage rolled through the line. A prisoner shouted, "We can't live like this!" Another banged his tin plate against the wall. Within seconds, dozens joined, the clatter echoing like war drums. The guards moved in, batons raised, but the sound only grew louder, fiercer. Men screamed until their voices cracked. The courtyard boiled with fury. Tendai felt the vibration of something unstoppable, something that had been waiting in the dark corners of Chikurubi for years. Then, someone threw a rock. It struck a guard across the temple. Blood splattered. The guard staggered back, and just like that, Chikurubi exploded. Prisoners surged forward, hundreds of bodies, crashing against the guards like a tidal wave. Tin plates became weapons. Sharpened wires flashed in desperate fists. The air filled with dust, blood, and screams. Tendai was caught in the middle, shoved and dragged in the chaos. He saw Jabulani swinging a broken broomstick, smashing it into a guard's shield. Spider leaped onto another, his teeth bared like a beast. The guards responded with batons and tear gas. Coughing men fell to their knees, their eyes burning as clouds of white smoke consumed the yard. Gunshots cracked overhead. The towers roared with fire, but the prisoners did not retreat. A chant rose above the chaos. "Bread, freedom, bread, freedom." The words became a battle cry, echoing off the cracked prison walls. Through the smoke, Tendai stumbled toward the corner where Baba Moses was crouched, shielding his face from the gas. "Run, my son!" the old man shouted, his voice hoarse. "They will kill us all." But Tendai froze. Ahead of him, Spider was dragging a fallen guard into the shadows. The guard was young, no older than 20, his helmet rolling across the ground. Blood streamed down his face as Spider raised a jagged blade. For a heartbeat, Tendai's world narrowed to that scene. The helpless guard, the blade, the madness. He could turn away, save himself. Or he could step in. Something inside him snapped. Tendai lunged forward, grabbing Spider's arm mid-swing. "Enough!" he shouted. His voice cracked, but it cut through the chaos like lightning. Spider's eyes blazed. "What are you doing, boy? This is survival." "This is murder. Tendai spat back. The two grappled, the blade flashing between them. Around them, the riot thundered, men screaming, guards firing. Tendai felt Spider's strength bearing down, the knife inching closer to his throat. Then, bang! A gunshot tore through the air. Tendai froze. Spider slumped suddenly, his body heavy against him. Blood poured from his chest. A guard on the wall reloaded, expression blank. The knife clattered to the ground. Tendai staggered back, shaking, his ears ringing with the chaos of hell itself. Hours later, the riot was crushed. The courtyard was a graveyard of broken bodies, the air still choking with tear gas and smoke. Tendai sat against the wall, his chest heaving, his hands stained with blood. Not his own, but Spider's. Around him, prisoners groaned in pain, some never moving again. Guards dragged survivors back into cells, beating them as they went. When the iron door slammed shut once more, Tendai collapsed onto the concrete. His mind replayed the moment again and again. The blade, Spider's face, the shot that ended it. He had survived the riot. But in surviving, he had seen a truth that shook him to his core. Inside Chikurubi, there was no line between justice and savagery. Everyone was trapped in the same inferno. But the riot was only the beginning. In the ashes of violence, whispers of something even more dangerous began to spread, a secret escape plan, and once again, fate would pull Tendai into the fire. The days after the riot felt like living inside a grave. The air in Chikurubi was heavy, poisoned with the smell of dried blood and smoke that clung to the cracked walls. Prisoners limped through the corridors like ghosts, their bodies bruised, their eyes hollow. Some were missing, dragged away to solitary or buried in nameless pits outside the prison gates. Tendai couldn't shake the images. Spider's face in those final moments. The guards' terrified eyes, the thunder of gunfire. At night, he woke gasping, his hands trembling as though the knife were still between them. But Chikurubi offered no space for grief. Here, sorrow was weakness, and weakness was death. One night, while the prisoners lay in uneasy silence, Jabulani crept closer to Tendai. His scarred face glistened in the pale moonlight that seeped through the barred window. "There is talk," he murmured, his voice barely a breath. "Talk of what?" Tendai asked, wary. Jabulani's eyes flicked toward the door, making sure no guards lingered. "Escape. Some men are planning it. After the riot, the walls are cracked, the guards distracted. It is the only chance we will ever get." The word escape hit Tendai like a spark on dry tinder. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine it. The sky without bars, the sound of wind without gunfire, his mother's face again. But just as quickly, fear followed. "Escape?" Tendai whispered. "They'll kill us before we even reach the gate." Jabulani's scar twisted as he smirked. "Perhaps? But staying here will kill us slower." Over the next days, Tendai was drawn into a circle of men who met in the shadows, their voices low but fierce. Among them was General Mofu, his presence commanding as ever, though even he bore the scars of the riot. His left arm hung stiffly, a wound bound in dirty cloth. "We cannot live as cattle any longer," Mofu growled. "The riot failed because it was blind rage. But an escape can be planned." Maps were scratched into the dirt with broken spoons. Guards' routines were memorized, shifts counted, weak spots identified. The plan was simple in theory, impossible in practice, through the drainage tunnels beneath the courtyard. "The pipes lead beyond the fence," Baba Moses explained softly, his old hands trembling as he traced the line. "I worked on them years ago, when they forced us into labor. If we time it right, we can crawl through to freedom." As the plan took shape, Tendai's heart split in two. Part of him yearned to run, to claw his way through those tunnels and taste the air of freedom again, to find his family, to reclaim the life stolen from him. But another part hesitated. He had seen what Chikurubi did to men. He had seen Spider's hunger for blood, Mofu's lust for control, the guards' merciless cruelty. If he escaped with these men, what kind of life would he walk into? And worse, what of Baba Moses? The old man's body was frail. Could he even survive the crawl through the tunnels? Leaving him behind felt like betrayal. "Do not think too long, Moana," Jabulani warned one night. "When the time comes, you must run without looking back, or you will die in here." The plan was set for a night when the moon would be hidden by clouds. Rain lashed the roof as the chosen men gathered in silence. The air reeked of damp earth and fear. Tendai's chest tightened as Mofu whispered the signal. Now. The men slipped into the courtyard, their movements cloaked by the storm. They pried open the rusted grate covering the drainage tunnel. One by one, they slid inside, swallowed by darkness. When Tendai's turn came, his heart thundered so loud he feared the guards would hear it. He glanced back. Baba Moses stood at the edge, his face calm but his body trembling. "Go, my son," the old man whispered. "Do not carry me. Carry hope." Tendai's throat burned, but he nodded. Then he dropped into the tunnel. The tunnel was suffocating, the air thick with filth and rot. Tendai crawled on hands and knees, the mud sucking at his palms, the stench clawing at his lungs. Behind him, Jabulani's heavy breathing filled the darkness. Ahead, faint glimmers of light teased them. But then, shouts erupted above. Guards had discovered the open grate. Floodlights blazed across the yard. Sirens wailed like banshees. "They've seen us!" someone hissed. Panic surged. The men crawled faster, their breaths ragged, the tunnel shaking with their frantic scrambles. Tendai's knees bled, his fingers numb. He could hear boots thundering above, dogs barking, rifles cocking, and then gunfire. Bullets tore into the tunnel walls, dirt raining down. A man behind him screamed and went silent. "Keep moving!" Jabulani roared. Tendai pushed forward, his heart pounding like a war drum, the light ahead growing brighter, closer, freedom just a few meters away. At the tunnel's end, the grate was jammed, rust fused tight. The men clawed at it desperately, their fingernails breaking, their skin tearing. Mhofu slammed his shoulder against it again and again until finally, with a screech, it gave way. Cool night air rushed in. Freedom. But as the first men spilled out, gunfire erupted behind them. Jabulani shoved Tendai forward, his scarred face twisted with determination. "Go, Moana! Run!" Tendai stumbled out into the open field beyond the walls. The rain lashed his face, the grass soft beneath his bleeding hands. He could hear the chaos behind, the screams, the bullets, the desperate scramble. He hesitated, torn between running into the night or turning back for the men who had stood beside him in the shadows of hell. Tendai's breath came in ragged gasps as he stood on the edge of freedom, the storm raging around him. But in Chikurubi, nothing was certain. For every step forward, death still lurked behind. The question was no longer whether he could escape, but whether he could truly be free.